You ever have a moment in life that rewrites everything you thought you knew about someone? Like, really rewrites it. Not just a surprise, not just a twist, I mean the kind of moment that knocks the wind out of your soul a little. That was me, the day I found out my older brother had been secretly paying my mortgage for almost a year, without telling me, without asking for credit, and without ever expecting I'd find out. But to really understand why that moment hit so hard, I gotta take you back to when things weren't so pretty. See, a couple years back, life hit me like a freight train in slow motion. I had just gone through a nasty separation, not just emotionally brutal, but financially messy too. My ex and I had bought a little two-bedroom fixer-upper on the edge of town. Quaint, decent bones, but nothing fancy. When she left, she didn't just walk away from the marriage, she walked away from the mortgage too. And she took the joint savings with her. I tried to hold on to the house. Not for pride, not even for comfort, but because it was the only thing I had left that still felt like mine. At the time, my older brother Matthew and I, well, let's just say we weren't what you'd call close. Not estranged exactly, but we hadn't really talked in years. There were texts on birthdays, the occasional half-hearted call on Thanksgiving, and every now and then he'd drop a comment on a Facebook photo, but that was about it. Life had pulled us in different directions. Matthew had always been the golden boy. The one who got straight A's, the one who mom bragged about to her book club, the one who'd left town after college and never looked back. I was more, the kid who stuck around. The fixer. The one who tried to patch up dad's old truck every winter and help mom with the groceries when her knees started to go. I always thought Matthew and I just weren't built the same. He was clean suits and sharp decisions. I was duct tape and late-night ramen. And maybe that's why I never asked him for help when the bills started piling up and the house felt like it was shrinking under the weight of unpaid notices. I couldn't. Not out of pride, but because I figured he wouldn't care. So when I started getting these mysterious adjustments on my mortgage statement, small credits, reductions in my monthly dues, I just assumed it was the bank fixing their mistake. Or maybe some COVID-era relief thing I forgot I'd applied for. I didn't question it. I didn't want to question it. Because when you're drowning, you don't ask why the water got shallower, you just breathe. But then one day, I got a letter in the mail from the mortgage company. Not an email. A real letter. One of those crisp, impersonal ones with too much legal language and not enough kindness. It was a confirmation notice, addressed to Matthew. Apparently, he had submitted a change of payment method request, and since the account was still partially in both our names, back when my ex and I had co-signed, the system had defaulted to notifying all parties. That's how I found out. One mistake. One glitch. I remember standing on my porch with that letter in my hand, reading it over and over like I was trying to will it to say something else. It felt like my heart didn't know whether to sink or swell. And the first thought that came to mind wasn't even gratitude, it was confusion. Why? Why would Matthew, of all people, do this? I didn't call him right away. In fact, I let a whole week go by, letting the knowledge sit in my bones, trying to make sense of it before I confronted him. Because part of me was scared of the answer. What if it was pity? What if he thought I was too pathetic to save myself? But the truth, the real reason he did it, that came later. And when it did, it wasn't what I expected. And that, my friend, is where this story really begins. Now, Matthew, he was never one for long talks or heart spilled on the floor kind of moments. He was the kind of man who showed up late to Thanksgiving but always brought the best bottle of wine. Said little, observed a lot. You never really knew what was going on in that head of his, and I used to take that silence for distance. After I got that letter, I let it stew for a bit. Pride's a funny thing. Even when someone does something good for you, especially when they do something good for you, it can still sting if you weren't the one to ask for it. It's like it makes the failure more real, you know. But eventually, I couldn't sit on it any longer. I called him. He picked up on the third ring, same flat tone he always used when he didn't know what the call was about. I told him straight, I got the letter. The one from the mortgage company. Asked him if he knew anything about it. There was a long pause. Long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then he let out this small, tired sigh and said, "Guess they weren't supposed to send that." No apology. No explanation. Just that. And maybe that's what cracked the dam a little, that calm, unbothered voice, like he was talking about the weather, not the fact that he'd quietly been covering my back for nearly a year. So I asked him why. Not with anger. Not with gratitude either. Just, honestly. He didn't answer right away. But eventually he said, "You remember that night? After Mom's funeral? When we sat in the garage?" Yeah. I remembered. It had been a rough night, cold, quiet, and raw. The guests had all gone home, the dishes were still stacked in the sink, and I was sitting in that drafty old garage drinking from a can of cheap beer because it was the only place I could cry without feeling watched. Matthew came out there, sat across from me on an overturned paint bucket, and we didn't say a word for hours. Just sat. No comfort. No judgment. Just presence. He said, "That night, you told me you were scared you couldn't hold everything together. You didn't think I heard you. But I did. I had forgotten saying that. Or maybe I just convinced myself no one was listening." He was right, though. I was scared. I was trying to take care of the house, of Mom's old stuff, of everything she left behind. Bills were piling up, grief was piling up, and I felt like I was running on fumes. Matthew went on, still quiet. "I wanted to help. But I figured if I offered, you'd say no. Or worse, feel like I was just trying to rescue you. I didn't want to take anything from you, not your pride, not your sense of ownership. I wanted you to breathe again. You ever feel tears come up before you even know you're crying?" That was me, right then and there, holding the phone against my cheek like it might catch the weight of that moment. My brother, the man I thought had long outgrown this family, who I'd quietly resented for leaving and thriving while I stayed behind and struggled, he'd been watching. Listening. And he'd carried my burden without ever making it feel like a debt. I asked him why he never told me. Why he didn't just call. Say something. And he said this. "Because if I told you, it would have become a favor. I didn't want it to be that. I wanted it to just be love." I still don't know what to do with that kind of grace. Most folks walk around with expectations tied to every act of kindness. Strings, conditions, "Someday I'll need this back" sort of energy. But Matthew? He gave without wanting credit. Helped without needing applause. Looking back, I think he did it not just to help me, but to make peace with a version of himself too. Maybe the guilt of being the brother who left, who couldn't come back in time to say goodbye to Mom, who always felt a little too distant from the mess of our family, maybe that guilt made him give quietly. But whatever the reason, the result was the same. He saved my home. Not because I asked. Not because I deserved it. But because he saw the cracks forming, and he cared enough to fill them before they caved in. I didn't sleep much after that call with Matthew. Not because I was upset, far from it. I just kept turning his words over in my head like a stone in my hand, feeling the edges smooth out each time I thought about them. I wanted it to just be love. You don't hear that kind of honesty much anymore. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I'd been wrong about Matthew all these years. Not just wrong, I'd painted him in a color he never wore. I thought he'd left because he didn't care. But maybe he left because he didn't know how to stay without being swallowed by everything. Maybe he thought I was stronger. And maybe I was. The next day, I walked around the house just, noticing. The same house that had once felt like a noose around my neck suddenly felt like a lifeline I hadn't even seen. The roof Matthew had helped keep over my head. The kitchen table I ate my meals on, never knowing who'd quietly made sure the light stayed on. I opened a drawer and saw a past due notice I'd forgotten to throw away, and for a second I felt shame rise up again. But it was quieter now. Softer. Like it had lost its power. Because what Matthew did wasn't just financial. He'd reminded me that someone still saw me. Still believed I was worth saving. That matters more than folks realize. Especially when you've spent years being the one who always holds the line. A week later, I invited Matthew over. First time in a long while. He showed up in his usual uniform, dark jeans, clean boots, that windbreaker he's had for what feels like 2 decades. When he stepped inside, he looked around like he was seeing the place for the first time. I guess in a way, he was. He hadn't been here since Mom passed. I offered him a beer, and we sat on the porch in silence for a while, just like we used to in the summers growing up. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I said thank you. Real quiet, but real direct. No long speech, no dramatics. Just those 2 words. Thank you. He didn't say anything at first. Just nodded a little, sipped his beer, and looked out across the yard. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "You remember when Dad left? You were what, 11? You stood out on that porch and told me not to cry because we still had each other." I didn't remember saying it, but he did. "That always stuck with me," he said. "You've been carrying people your whole life, Sam. Just figured it was time someone carried you for a bit." And that's when it hit me, Matthew wasn't doing this to fix me. He wasn't trying to rescue his little brother out of guilt or obligation. He was returning a favor I never even knew I'd given. Love's like that sometimes. It passes between people in ways you don't always catch. A look, a moment, a memory buried so deep you don't even know you planted it. But it grows. Quietly, steadily. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it blooms. We didn't talk much after that. Didn't need to. He stayed for dinner. Helped me fix the back screen door that had been loose since spring. And when he left, he clapped a hand on my shoulder the way our old man used to, except this time, it felt like comfort, not control. That night, as I lay in bed, I looked up at the ceiling and thought about how close I'd come to losing this place. Not just the house, but the home. And how, without me even realizing it, Matthew made sure it stayed standing. And the truth is, some debts can't be paid back with money. They can only be honored. By showing up. By listening. By loving someone the way they didn't even know they needed. It was a rainy Tuesday when I found the letter. Funny how these things tend to surface when you're not looking for them. I'd been clearing out the hallway drawer, you know the one, the catch-all where old receipts, expired coupons, and random keys go to die. I was digging for a screwdriver, but instead, I found an envelope tucked beneath a stack of yellowed utility bills. No name on the front, just my address in Matthew's handwriting. Sharp. Neat. Like he'd taken his time. I held it for a moment, just staring, before I sat down at the kitchen table and slid my finger under the seal. The paper was folded clean, twice, like he'd measured the creases. The letter wasn't long, but every word carried weight. He'd written it nearly 10 months ago, right around the time my mortgage payments mysteriously stopped drowning me. He wrote that he didn't know if I'd ever read it. He figured maybe he'd leave it somewhere I'd find it eventually, or maybe not. He wasn't good with the talking kind of love, he said. Too many years pretending strength meant silence. But he wanted me to know why. He wrote that he'd been watching from afar, not in a creepy way, but in a brother's way. Watching me try to keep everything afloat. Watching me sacrifice little pieces of myself just to make sure I didn't lose the last thing Mom had loved, this house. He said he knew the house mattered, but not for the reasons people might think. It wasn't about walls or a roof. It was about memory. About holding on to something stable in a life that had turned too shaky too fast. He talked about guilt. About how he'd left town right when I needed him most. How he'd buried himself in work and distance and silence because he didn't know how to show up without feeling like a fraud. He said he thought he was doing me a favor by staying away, letting me be the strong one. But when Mom died, and he saw me standing at the foot of her hospital bed, alone, holding her hand like a soldier standing guard, something in him cracked. He wrote, "I realized that you've been carrying everyone else's grief while I carried my excuses." That line knocked the wind out of me. I had to stop reading for a minute, just sit there staring at the kitchen tile like it might offer some balance. Then I picked it up again. He said the mortgage payments weren't about money. He said it was about trust. He wanted me to know that someone still had my back. That I didn't have to keep pretending to be bulletproof. That maybe for once, I could let someone else be the net. And then at the end, he wrote something that tore me right down to the bone. "I don't expect thanks. And I don't expect forgiveness either. I just hope that one day, when you're ready, you'll let me be your brother again." I sat there long after the letter ended, the rain still tapping against the windows like it was trying to remind me how to feel. I don't know how long I sat there, but I do know that by the time I stood up, something had shifted. The kind of shift you don't notice right away, like the first bit of green poking up through frozen ground. It's small. Quiet. But it changes everything. I put the letter back in the envelope and placed it in my desk drawer, right next to a picture of us from when we were kids, sitting on the hood of Dad's old Buick with matching grass-stained jeans and stupid grins. It felt right, like the letter belonged next to a memory that hadn't been tainted by time or ego. That night, I sent Matthew a message. Nothing big. Just said, "Found the letter. Took me long enough." He replied 10 minutes later, "I was wondering when you'd clean out that drawer." And that was it. No heart-to-heart. No emotional unraveling. Just that quiet understanding that something old had mended. And in the way only brothers can, we didn't need to say more. About a month after I read the letter, Matthew called out of the blue and asked if I could help him with something. He said it casual, like we'd been doing this back and forth every weekend since we were teenagers. No build-up, no hesitation. Just, "You free this Saturday?" I told him I was. Didn't ask what it was for. Didn't need to. There was a steadiness between us again, the kind that doesn't need explaining. Saturday came, and I pulled into his driveway just after noon. He lived out near the edge of town, in one of those older neighborhoods with big trees and cracked sidewalks that creak under your boots. His house was modest but well kept, like him, really. Nothing flashy, but grounded. When I walked in, I expected a busted sink or maybe a leaky roof. What I didn't expect was a dozen half-packed boxes sitting in the living room and a look in his eyes that told me this wasn't just a project, it was a shift. He told me he was moving. Not out of town, just across it. Closer to work, closer to things that mattered now. Said he'd been putting it off for too long. That this place had too many ghosts. I knew what he meant without asking. The walls still held shadows of a life he didn't quite live, of choices he never made, of silence he'd finally decided to stop feeding. So we spent the whole day packing. I didn't ask why he'd waited so long. He didn't say much about why now. But every time I taped a box shut, I felt like I was helping him do something more than relocate. I was helping him shed. Every book, every photo, every piece of clothing that went into those boxes felt like a weight lifted, not just for him, but for me too. Because this quiet work side by side, it was healing something in both of us we didn't even realize was still broken. Midway through the afternoon, I found an old box labeled "Dad's Tools" in the corner of his garage. I popped the lid, and there it was, Dad's old hammer, the one with the worn grip and the chipped claw. Matthew saw me holding it and gave a small smile. Said he couldn't bring himself to use it. Too many memories. I nodded and told him I'd take it. Not out of sentiment, but because someone should put it to use again. Someone should keep holding the past in their hands without letting it drag them backward. That night, after the truck was loaded, we sat on the back porch with 2 cold beers and a kind of silence that only comes when something important has just ended and something else, something better, is starting. And that's when he said it. Soft, almost like he wasn't sure if he was ready to say it aloud. "I sold some stocks to make those mortgage payments, you know." I looked over at him, eyebrows raised. That was news to me. "Figured it was better than watching the market go up while your house went under," he said with a half shrug. I asked him if he wanted the money back. His answer came without pause. "Nope. Never did." And that's when I told him the truth. I'd taken a second job a few months back. Something part-time, flexible. I didn't need the money anymore, not since the mortgage got caught up, but I kept the job anyway. I'd been putting the extra into savings, waiting for the right reason to use it. "Well," I said, "I think I just found it." He looked at me sideways. I told him I wanted to pay for his move-in costs. First month's rent. Security deposit. Truck rental. Whatever he needed. And no, it wasn't a favor. It wasn't charity. It was family. It was balance. It was one brother finally standing beside the other, not ahead, not behind. He tried to object, of course. Old habits. Pride and all. But I cut him off before he could finish. "You didn't do what you did for a thank you," I said. "And I'm not doing this for one either." He looked away, blinked a few times like he had something in his eye, then just nodded. That was the moment the scales tipped, not in numbers or money, but in grace. Because repayment, real repayment, isn't about evening the score. It's about continuing the story. It's about saying, "I see you, I remember, and I'm here." The house is quieter these days, but not in that heavy, empty kind of way it used to be. It breathes better now, like something in the walls let go of a long-held sigh. I've repainted the kitchen. Finally fixed that sagging porch step. Even built a little garden bed out back where Mom used to keep her rosemary bush. Funny thing, first time I planted something in years, and somehow it didn't die. I took that as a sign. Matthew settled into his new place just fine. Smaller than his old one, but closer to the office and walking distance to this little corner diner he swears makes the best coffee in the city. I've been there. Coffee's not bad, but I think it's the waitress with the warm smile that keeps him coming back. He hasn't said anything, but I can tell. The way he lingers over that second cup, asks about her weekend. He's loosening up. Living a little. It suits him. We talk more now. Not every day, but enough. Sunday morning check-ins. The occasional shared chore. He came over last week just to help me replace the water heater. Didn't have to. Didn't ask. Just showed up with a tool bag and 2 sandwiches like it was the most natural thing in the world. That's how love shows up, I've learned, not loud, not grand. Just there. And me? I'm still in the same house, but it doesn't feel the same. Not because the paint's fresh or the plumbing finally behaves, but because I know now it's not just a place I live. It's a place someone fought for me to keep, even when I didn't know how to ask. And that kind of thing, it changes a man. Not overnight. Not with fireworks. But slow, steady, like a tide smoothing over jagged rock. I still keep Matthew's letter in my desk drawer. Every now and then, I take it out, not to read it, but just to hold it. To remind myself what real love looks like when it's stripped of pride and polished in sacrifice. He didn't owe me anything. But he gave anyway. And not because he thought I was weak, but because he saw I'd been strong for too long. The truth is, life doesn't always give us the kind of closure we expect. Sometimes people hurt us and never apologize. Sometimes we give and never get back. But every now and then, if we're lucky, someone steps up. Quietly. Faithfully. Without fanfare. They catch us before we fall, or sometimes after. And they don't say, "You owe me." They just say, "I'm here." That's what Matthew gave me. Not just help. Not just money. He gave me the knowledge that I wasn't alone. That all those years I thought he was gone, maybe he was just finding his way back. And maybe I was too. So now, when I walk through this house, I don't see the cracks anymore. I see stories. I see survival. I see two brothers who never said the things they needed to when they were boys, but found a way to say them as men. And I've learned something along the way. Sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't come wrapped in words or grand gestures. Sometimes, it's a mortgage paid quietly behind your back. A letter left in a drawer. A cup of coffee shared in a booth with cracked vinyl seats. What fades is the pain. What stays is the memory. But what matters, what really matters, is the love that held you when you didn't even know you were slipping. And that's something worth carrying.